Hi everyone! Today we'll be talking about the controversial music that astronauts once heard in space. A few years ago, NASA made public the recording of a bizarre music that the astronomers from Apollo 10 reported hearing in May 1969, while they were flying over the far side of the moon. At that moment, they were out of radio contact with Earth. This happened months before the first astronaut set foot on the lunar surface. There were 3 people on board: Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan. The sounds lasted for about an hour. Astronomers managed to record them and transmit them to Mission Control in Houston. Now, I want you to listen to these whistling sounds.
That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound? Yeah.
Don't they resemble some kind of otherworldly outer space music? So the question is, could the astronauts have heard alien music coming from outer space? Well, there's another more simple, non-alien involving explanation for this cosmic phenomenon, but we'll talk about it a bit later. In the audio recording from the Apollo 10 mission, astronaut Eugene Cernan, who was piloting the lunar module, could be heard asking John Young, piloting the command module, if he could hear that whistling sound. Cernan was the first one to call these sounds music and to add that they were kinda outer spacey. Later, when the 2 astronauts asked Tom Stafford, who was in the lunar module with Cernan, if he could hear the sounds too, he confirmed it and stated that they were really weird. Young suggested they should find out more about them. "Nobody will believe us," he added. Apollo 10 was a mission that paved the way for Apollo 11, which landed 2 humans on the lunar surface. The Apollo 10 astronauts flew to the moon in a command module. However, 2 of the crew members also had a ride in the lunar module, which allowed them to drop down to less than 10 miles above the moon's surface. So, since they managed to approach our natural satellite so closely, could they have heard something coming from the lunar surface? Well, apparently not. Turns out that the creepy whistling sound was nothing more than some interference between the VHF radios on the 2 different vehicles. Interestingly enough, Apollo 11 astronaut Michael Collins later wrote in his book, Carrying the Fire, that NASA technicians had warned him about the whistling. He also mentioned that if he hadn't known about the origins of this music, it would have scared him to no end. In 2008, NASA shared the transcripts of the Apollo 10 transmission, but according to the documents themselves, they were declassified in 1982. In 2012, NASA also shared the audio files online. If you listen to these files, you'll hear that the astronauts sound sincerely awed and puzzled by what they hear. Moreover, they bring it up over and over again. It's also worth mentioning that you never actually feel that the 3 men were panicked or alarmed while going over the transcript or the audio. Some sources put particular emphasis on the fact that the space music started when the astronauts were over the far side of the moon. They didn't have radio or visual contact with Mission Control for about an hour, something that had been expected. Some documentaries used this moment to create tension by saying things like, the astronauts were on their own, no one on Earth could see or hear them. However, the narrators never explained why the astronauts' isolation could have been such a significant factor. By no means was it connected to the not-so-mysterious sounds undersourced. There's another interesting element to this story that we should consider though, and it's the fact that Apollo 10 astronauts never discussed this incident and the sounds publicly. However, it's still unclear whether they talked about it with NASA engineers. This makes some people speculate that the astronauts didn't want to project anything but a rock-hard psyche. Showing a drop of confidence even once during the whole mission could have left them out of the whole project.
Just a few months after the amazing success of Apollo 11, you know, the whole one step for a man, one giant leap for mankind story, NASA sent another mission to the moon. But things got pretty dicey during the launch of Apollo 12, which happened in November 1969. Still riding high on the triumph of the first moon landing, NASA decided to push the limits even further with Apollo 12's mission, planning to land on the Ocean of Storms, the biggest dark spot on the moon. For the first moon landing, they went for the Sea of Tranquility because it's a relatively flat and even spot. This time around, the goal was to land the spacecraft with even more precision. Commander Pete Conrad and landing module pilot Al Bean would get to spend more time on the lunar surface with 2 excursions planned. They would even get to send back the first color TV images from the moon. On November 14th, the team climbed aboard the massive Saturn V rocket in Florida, while the flight director took his place at the Mission Control Center in Houston. It was his first time leading a mission, and little did he know about the dramatic events that would soon unfold. Near the launching site, some storms had occurred, so the ground was a bit wet and the sky was cloudy. At 11:22, the huge white rocket started to lift off the pad and zoom up into the sky. Conrad and his team were shouting in excitement. But then, only 36 seconds into the flight, something went wrong. There was a flash, and all the power to the spacecraft was gone. It was really scary, and all the alarms started going off. The team inside Apollo 12 was perplexed. They had no idea what had happened. But after some investigation, they found out that the rocket had been hit not once, but twice by lightning strikes. The good news was that the rocket's design allowed it to continue its mission despite the unexpected setback. Even though it seemed like they were in deep trouble, the Saturn V guidance computer was totally fine and kept the rocket on track. They soon got into orbit and said, "Hey, let's go to the moon." 4 days later, Conrad and Bean made a great landing just feet away from their target, the Surveyor 3 probe. Conrad was so excited to explore the lunar surface that he couldn't wait to get outside. The whole NASA team behind this mission was worried that people might have lost interest in the program after Apollo 11. But they had a plan: the first color TV broadcast from the surface. 2 companies were tasked with broadcasting the lunar mission live. In those days, it was important because having 2 networks joining the effort meant they could reach millions of people. However, even though NASA focused on TV as a way to connect with the public, the astronauts didn't really get trained on how to use the camera. When Conrad made his way down the ladder to the moon's surface, he had to open up a storage bay to get the video camera out. The footage was a bit blurry and showed only his legs at first, but it was still amazing to see. After a little while, Bean popped up next to his teammate on the surface, and they both took a moment to soak up the crazy new world they found themselves in. Bean wanted to make sure everybody back on Earth could watch what was happening, so he grabbed the camera, wanting to set it up on a stand. But oops, he accidentally aimed it at the sun, and most of the screen went dark, except for a really bright white spot at the top. Whoopsies, I guess. Even though the astronauts and mission control team tried really hard, they couldn't fix the camera. It looked like the image sensors were busted for good. Thankfully, the TV networks had a plan B. They switched over to a studio where 2 actors dressed up like astronauts did a cool simulation of the moonwalk.
Very fine-grained as you get closer.
They still played the real voices of the astronauts, though, so the audience got to hear everything they were saying. Apollo 12's story didn't end once the astronauts got back to Earth safely. In September 2002, a strange space object was noticed by astronauts. It was orbiting our planet in an unusual way. Little did they know that the mysterious object was connected to the Apollo 12 mission. Scientists initially thought the object was an asteroid. They were surprised by this discovery since they thought the moon was the only natural object orbiting Earth. This thing wasn't an asteroid at all, though. It was actually human-made. Turns out it was the rocket that launched the Apollo 12 astronauts to the moon. It left Earth in 1969 and came back 30 years later. What do you think happened to it during all that time? Named the Saturn V rocket, it had 3 stages, each with a specific job to get the astronauts to the moon. The first stage burned for 2.5 minutes, lifting them to 42 miles above the Earth's surface. The second stage then took over for 6 minutes, taking them even higher and faster. Finally, the third stage gave a quick burn to get the spacecraft into orbit. Once there, it did another burn to send the rocket and the crew toward the moon. After that, the third stage was supposed to be discarded safely, or so everyone hoped. During the Apollo 12 mission, though, things didn't go quite to plan with the discarded part. In order to ditch Apollo 12's third stage, NASA had to program it to have a special path to meet up with the moon. But their first calculations would have led the third stage of the rocket to the wrong side of the moon. so they had to adjust the target and the speed. Luckily, the third stage had these cool little thrusters that helped it turn around. Even though specialists had to adjust their plan, it didn't waste much energy since it was done in advance. By the time they let that third portion of the rocket go, the team had been going super fast. To make sure the part went to the right spot, they just had to slow it down a bit. Easy peasy, you might think. Yet again, things didn't go exactly as planned. In reality, NASA had a little mishap with their tracking system when they sent this rocket. It turns out the system was a bit off, which caused them to slow down the rocket too much and overcorrect it by just 25 miles per hour. This small mistake ended up affecting the rocket's initial trajectory. At one point, it even reached Lagrange point 1, which is a special point in space where the gravitational forces of Earth and the Sun balance out. The plan for this third part of the rocket was to send it on a trajectory beyond our planet, making it orbit the Sun. It would have been our safest bet, ensuring it wouldn't affect future missions to the Moon by accidentally bumping into other spacecraft. But because of the miscalculations, this unlucky piece still ended up traveling around the Sun, but in a wacky pattern on the inside of Earth's own orbit around the star. It took 30 years for this unusual object to be dragged back to our planet's orbit by coming across it at the Lagrange point 1 again finally. Once it reached this point, it began to spin around Earth in a very unusual pattern. To eventually identify the rocket, scientists performed spectroscopy. This method allowed them to identify what sorts of materials were inside the object. In short, they were able to figure out the composition of the rocket by studying the way it reflected light. It didn't take long before they figured out that what they were looking at was a special kind of white paint that was used for coating NASA rockets.
NASA sent a spacecraft right into the Sun. It's the fastest human-made object ever, and could cover the distance from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. in just 1 second. The Parker Solar Probe's mission is to study our star's dangerous behavior. Scientists warn that massive solar storms are inevitable, and the consequences could be catastrophic for our planet. The spacecraft got 7 times closer to the Sun than any other probe ever did. It managed to do so during its 20-second flyby to the star since its launch in 2018. Because our star is so massive, its gravity is really strong, like a giant magnet. As the probe flies around the Sun, it uses gravity to go faster and faster and eventually picks up that crazy speed. As it got closer and closer to the Sun's corona, which is its outer atmosphere, the probe had to survive temperatures of 2,552 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt many metals. It was protected from that heat and radiation by a 4.5-inch thick carbon shield. It kept the tools inside the probe safe and running at around room temperature. The scientists went to all this effort because they're hoping to solve a big mystery about the Sun that's been puzzling them for ages. The surface of our main star is already super hot, but as you move closer out to the corona, the temperature shoots up to millions of degrees. And it doesn't make any sense because it's farther away from the Sun. So maybe we could finally get some answers about this heat phenomenon. The mission is also going to help us understand something called solar wind. The Sun is constantly shooting out tiny bits of energy and charged particles into space, like a never-ending breeze of electricity. When this solar wind hits Earth, it can create amazing light shows in the sky called auroras. The more active the Sun is, the farther south you can see auroras. Our star follows natural cycles that last about 11 years. The activity goes from low to high and back down to low. Right now, we're in the solar maximum, the peak of the activity cycle. That's why we've spotted beautiful auroras in the most unexpected places in 2024. The downside to it is that the Sun's activity can send out bursts of energy and charged particles that can mess up things like radios, satellites, and even GPS. It can be dangerous, especially for astronauts out in space who aren't as protected as we are here on Earth. Humans wouldn't feel the compression of the planet's electromagnetic field because of all the extra radiation, but power grids are really sensitive to it. If we don't act fast, when it happens, the influx of energy will go into power transformers all over the world, disrupt them, and leave big areas without electricity. If this happens during a hurricane or a tornado, when communication is already super important, it could make it much harder for emergency services to communicate and save lives. That's why it's so important to learn to predict this space weather. It's tricky because, unlike most disasters, like earthquakes, floods, and volcanoes, it doesn't leave behind any kind of physical evidence. The only big solar storms we really know about happened in 1859 and 1921. The first one, called the Carrington event, was so wild that it made sparks fly from telegraph wires. The auroras were seen all the way near the equator. Scientists back then were using a special kind of paper that reacted to light to record solar activity. During the Carrington event, the reading from the sun went off the page, literally. Whatever was happening, it was so extreme that we still don't fully understand it. Then, there was the New York Railroad Storm of 1921. It was powerful enough to knock out telegraph systems across the US, Europe, and the Southern Hemisphere. The storm boosted radio transmissions for a bit, making them travel farther than usual. But back then, there weren't nearly as many radios, so it wasn't super helpful. The bigger problem was the electrical grid in the US, which was heavily damaged. Back in 1859 and 1921, people weren't as dependent on tech as we are now. If a storm like that hits today, the consequences could be way more catastrophic. Scientists from New Zealand who study space weather are working on simulations trying to prevent disasters from happening. They say one of the possible options to do it is to study other suns like ours elsewhere in space. If we get data from thousands of stars, not just one, the picture for analysis would be more complete. So far, scientists have launched or plan to launch several other missions in addition to the Parker Solar Probe. Meanwhile, NASA is working on another mission, launching Endurance, robotic moon machinery on steroids. Its main mission will be to collect samples from key lunar locations that will later be retrieved by astronauts from the Artemis program. These samples are spread across the largest impact basin on the moon, separated by hundreds of miles. To do it, Endurance will have to be way more advanced than Perseverance, NASA's current most cutting-edge rover. Endurance will drive roughly 100 times further, drive 10 times faster, and collect roughly 200 times more sample mass. Endurance would also be the first planetary rover to drive at night. And because it will be on the far side of the moon with limited communication to Earth and surface data, it will have to drive autonomously between sample locks and make its own decisions in tough conditions. When it reaches its destination, it's going to switch to a more classic way of doing things. Scientists back on Earth will get involved directly, guiding the rover to explore the sites and collect samples. The teams on Earth will also keep an eye on how the rover is doing by monitoring its telemetry, which is the data it sends back, like its health stats. If they spot any signs that a part is wearing out or something isn't working quite right, they'll tweak the plan to keep things running smoothly. All this will cost huge amounts of money, probably way more than the Viper moon mission that was cancelled after NASA had spent around $450 million on it. While Endurance is in the planning stage, the Blue Ghost lunar lander is already on its way to the moon. Its main mission is research. It will spend 25 days in Earth's orbit, taking measurements and waiting for the right time to fling itself to the moon. After 4 days in transit, Blue Ghost will hang out in lunar orbit for another 16 days to collect more data. Then it will descend to one of the largest basins on the moon and spend 1 lunar day there. It will measure subsurface thermal data, radiation levels, and other important data. At the end of its mission, Blue Ghost will take some final pictures of the lunar sunset. it isn't designed to return back to our planet, so when the night falls, it will do some final work and go offline for good. NASA chose the team of University of Florida aerospace engineers to work on another innovative space project. It will cost $12 million, and its goal will be to improve the way we track changes in tectonic plates and oceans on Earth from space. It will use state-of-the-art sensors that will measure even the tiniest gravitational changes. The data it gets will help scientists monitor droughts, assess groundwater reserves, and better understand changes in sea levels. They expect to launch it around 2027 aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket.
So this year, before September, a star in the constellation of Corona Borealis will explode, and in the Northern Hemisphere, we'll be able to see it with the unaided eye. This star is T Corona Borealis, a white dwarf star 3,000 light-years away from our solar system. It will turn into a nova, which we'll discuss a bit later, in spring or summer. Even though this occurrence is predictable, happening every 80 years, it's still a once-in-a-lifetime event, if you're human. T Corona Borealis is not your regular star. It's actually a binary, two stars orbiting each other. This pair, though, is incredibly special. Occasionally, the stars increase their brightness to such an extent that they become visible on Earth. The white dwarf star is the more massive one of the two. But the most shocking thing about it is that it might pack the same mass as the Sun into a volume only as large as Earth. The companion star, an aging red giant, has already expanded so much that it's dumping its material onto the white dwarf. So it's time for another explosion for these two. It's going to take the star's brightness from magnitude 11 to magnitude 2. You see, in astronomy, magnitude is used to measure the brightness of a star or another celestial object. The brighter it is, the lower the number assigned as a magnitude is. It's like golf, low scores, you know. In our case, it means that we'll be able to see the star with the unaided eye, even in light-polluted skies. Now, we can only see the binary with binoculars in a completely dark sky. After the outburst, T Corona Borealis will remain the brightest star in the constellation of Corona Borealis for a few days before gradually dimming. Now, this event shouldn't be confused with a supernova. In a supernova, a star's core collapses, which leads to its complete destruction. It can only happen to a star 8 times the mass of the Sun. Instead of disappearing in a blinding flash of light forever, T Corona Borealis will experience a nova, an explosion on its surface, flinging matter into space but not ruining the star itself. Such recurrent novas happen at regular intervals. T Corona Borealis was known to astronomers from the past as the Blaze Star. Last time it exploded in 1866 and 1946. Astronomers from NASA believe it's going to do it again before September this year. The constellation of Corona Borealis, also known as the Northern Crown, is one of the most beautiful out there. It's a curved semicircle of 7 stars, which is easy to find in April. You should go outside 2 hours after dark and look to the east-northeast. Once you find the Big Dipper, use the curve of its handle to go to Arcturus, finding the bright star in the Buddhist constellation due east. If you go diagonally down to the east-northeast horizon, you'll spot Corona Borealis. Now, if you want to observe the brightening of T Corona Borealis, it might be better if you get acquainted with the region and the stars of the constellation it's in. Once the event begins, you'll be able to compare its brightness against the other stars and observe the thing without using any fancy cameras. Now, a nova is a short-lived sudden explosion involving a compact star as large as Earth or a bit bigger. The outburst comes from a white dwarf circling remarkably close to a regular star, so close that a stream of gas flows between them. This gas starts piling up until it creates a layer on the white dwarf's surface, and then it reaches a point where it detonates in a runaway thermonuclear explosion. According to astronomers, around 50 nova happen every year in our galaxy, but not all of them are noticed. NASA's Fermi Gamma Ray Space Telescope has observed several nova that occurred not far on the scale of the universe. They found out that each blast produces gamma rays. Those are the most energetic forms of light. Researchers also think that these gamma rays result from collisions among numerous shock waves, racing from the explosion site in a quickly expanding shell of debris. Now, after we've talked about novae, it's time to discuss something much more dramatic: supernovae. It's the largest explosion humans have ever seen. Each blast is a super powerful burst of a star. One kind of supernova is caused by the last hurrah of an extinguishing massive star. It happens to stars at least 5 times the mass of our Sun. Once they near the end of their lives, they go out with a ginormous bang. Huge stars burn incredible amounts of nuclear fuel at their core, producing tons of energy. It makes their centers immensely hot. Heat generates pressure, and this pressure keeps such stars from collapsing. But any star is in balance between 2 opposite forces. Its gravity attempts to squeeze the star into a teeny tiny ball, and the nuclear fuel burning at the core of the star produces powerful outward pressure. Now, when a giant star is running out of fuel, it starts cooling off. Its pressure drops and gravity wins. The star collapses. An enormous object that is millions of times the mass of Earth collapses within 15 seconds. No wonder this brisk process produces enormous shockwaves. It makes the outer layers of the star explode. Eventually, an incredibly dense core is all that is left behind, besides a growing cloud of hot gas called a nebula. A black hole, the densest object in the universe, is the result of a supernova of a star around 10 times as massive as our Sun. Also, there's another type of supernova. It usually happens in systems where 2 stars orbit each other, and at least one of these stars is a white dwarf the size of our planet. If such a star collides with another, or pulls too much matter from its neighbor, it can explode into a supernova. Also, supernovae are often so bright they can outshine the combined light of entire galaxies for several days or even months. Supernovae aren't common. Astronomers think just a few of them occur within the century in galaxies like our home Milky Way. But since the universe contains an enormous number of galaxies, we can observe a few hundred supernovae every year outside our galaxy. Unfortunately, space dust blocks our view of most supernovae happening within the Milky Way. Beetlejuice, a late-stage red giant, exploded in 2019, but it wasn't the event we expected to see. This star is found in the constellation of Orion and is huge, so big that if we moved it to the center of our solar system, its outer edge would go way beyond the orbit of Jupiter. When Beetlejuice eventually nears its end, it will explode in a stunningly bright supernova visible on Earth even during the day. This explosion could happen as soon as tomorrow or as far-flung as hundreds of thousands of years from now, so don't hold your breath. But then, what was it in 2019? Astronomers noticed that the star was dimming. They decided it was the initial stages of the grand show. But instead, Beetlejuice went back to normal over the course of the next few months. Further analysis revealed that the star hadn't dimmed. It just looked like that because we had been observing it through a cloud of stellar debris. At the same time, the amount of light in the photosphere of Beetlejuice ramped up. It was like a massive explosion of material from the surface of the star. Events like this occur on the Sun all the time, especially when our star's activity is high. Bits of the Sun's surface get tangled up and cast off. That's what we call coronal mass ejections. They don't harm our planet, but they can mess with satellites and electrical equipment. Now, getting back to Beetlejuice, we've never seen such a huge mass ejection on the surface of a star before. It's a new phenomenon which we can observe directly and even see surface details with the help of the Hubble telescope. Astronomers say we're watching stellar evolution as it happens for the first time. Strange explosions in vibrant blue colors are popping up around the universe and keeping astronomers intrigued. This rare and incredibly powerful event has a fancy name: Luminous Fast Blue Optical Transient. This phenomenon doesn't behave like anything else we know of, and things got even stranger when the most recent one happened in a spot it shouldn't have. To really understand what happened last year, we need to go back a bit. This type of strange explosion was spotted first in June 2018. The blue blast happened about 200 million light-years from Earth and got the nickname the Cow. No, this happening didn't resemble a cow at all, but it did have an unusual format. Back then, this blast was the most asymmetrical explosion ever seen by astronomers. It burst into space in a flattened pancake-like shape, not in a typical sphere as they would expect. This phenomenon was similar to a supernova, which is the most common type of cosmic explosion that happens when a star exhausts its nuclear fuel and collapses under its own gravity. However, scientists also noted three crucial differences. Number one, this phenomenon is more powerful than a typical supernova. When it happens, the blue burst emits more energy than an entire galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars like the Sun. Number two, it's much faster. The explosion reaches its peak brightness and fades away within a matter of days, while a supernova can take weeks or even months to completely dissipate. Then the last difference, these blue bursts can also be much brighter. These mysterious objects are considered the brightest known optical phenomenon in the universe. But unlike a regular supernova, it's believed that there are no radioactive elements to power this brightness. So that means the power must come from somewhere else. The question is, from where? This is just one of the mysteries that the scientists are trying to figure out. There have been some heavy investigations since the event was first observed, and 15 telescopes around the world are constantly looking for it. Since 2018, these extreme explosions have been spotted about once a year. So while they're rare, they're not incredibly uncommon. There are several possible explanations for the existence of these fast optical transients. Perhaps the most acceptable one is that it is a stellar corpse. I mean, what is left behind when a star calls it quits. So we're looking at two prime suspects here. They could be a neutron star or a black hole, producing emissions close to the speed of light. The theory goes like this. There is a massive star much larger than those that produce regular supernovas. Then it starts to collapse. Such an event would certainly be expected to leave a black hole behind. Let's say this massive star isn't ready to leave the universe in a quiet way. Instead, it creates a swirling disk around the black hole composed of gas, dust, and other matter, like it matters. This disk, called the accretion disk, can shoot out streams of material at incredibly high speeds, almost like powerful cosmic jets. And that could be exactly what we see as those sudden bursts of light. Again, it's just a theory. What exactly sets off these blasts remains a mystery, and much more observation and analysis are needed. Experts believe that explaining such an oddity is a scientific goldmine. After all, we're talking about a stellar corpse that isn't just sitting there, it's actually quite active. Now, since this event was first spotted, all similar occurrences that our telescopes have captured happened in the same place. I mean, the explosions always occurred in the spiral arms of different galaxies. But last year, things changed. The Hubble Space Telescope left scientists speechless in April 2023 when its images caught this same type of weird explosion happening for the first time in the middle of nowhere. Well, it didn't happen inside a galaxy as it was supposed to. It happened in the space between two of them. More precisely, about 50,000 light-years from a large spiral galaxy and about 15,000 light-years from a small one. This event is known today as the finch. Oh great. So when we finally get closer to finding some answers, the unusual location of the finch phenomenon came to mess it up again. So maybe there is another explanation for it. Speculation began soon after the discovery. One idea is that it could have been a collision between two neutron stars traveling far outside their host galaxies. These two could have been spiraling toward each other for billions of years, and when they collided, they produced a flare over 100 times brighter than a normal supernova. For this hypothesis to be correct, one of these neutron stars would have to be highly magnetized, amplifying the explosion. Another possibility is that the explosion was a star being torn apart by a black hole with a mass between 100 and 1,000 times that of the Sun. Although we still have lots of questions, one thing is for sure. The finch is a luminous, fast black optical transient. Except for the weird location where it happened, it has all the other characteristics to be classified as one. It's super bright, like me, and super fast, and its origin is super hard to explain. Plus, the data from the Gemini South Telescope, the Chandra X-ray Telescope, and the Very Large Array Radio Telescope have confirmed it. Adding this latest information only makes it harder and harder for researchers to finally find some kind of pattern in this whole event. The finch isn't the only peculiar event in this category. Let's head back to the year before, to 2022. A blue explosion was spotted in September, and it got the nickname of Tasmanian Devil. Just like the previous ones, this blue burst came up and disappeared very quickly. Then, something mysterious happened. Exactly 100 days later, observers who were still tracking the phenomenon got an early Christmas gift. They observed another flare-up, and it was as bright and fascinating as the original one. Wait, so we're talking about two similar and strange explosions that happened at the same spot and close in time? Well, this was a first. Quickly, 13 telescopes around the globe all had eyes turned toward the Tasmanian Devil event, including one equipped with a high-speed camera. Over the course of 120 days, they managed to capture another 14 irregular light pulses. This was certainly amazing because it proved that instead of showing up once and fading away as expected, the Tasmanian Devil continued to explode with supernova-like energies again and again and again. Can you imagine such power? This scenario still intrigues the scientific community because it pushes the limits of physics, not only because such extreme energy production, but also because of the short duration bursts. By the way, its flares last from 10 minutes to about 4 hours. Believe me, on the scale of the universe, that's considered super quick. This was the only time that an extended season of this event was observed. However, after some thought, the scientific community split their opinions about it. On one hand, the Tasmanian Devil could have been an utterly unique and one-of-a-kind event. On the other hand, maybe it was just the first time that our telescopes caught it from a more face-on angle. To further understand what's happening, scientists still need to observe larger samples of the phenomenon. All hopes are in the upcoming Vera C. Rubin Observatory, which is currently being constructed in Chile. It will have a 27.5-foot wide telescope, coupled with the world's largest digital camera ever fabricated for this purpose. According to NASA, this technology might finally give us some answers about these blue explosions. We can expect some exciting times ahead, as this could be the start of a new chapter in our understanding of stellar evolution. Now imagine a place where a single day lasts longer than a whole year. On Venus, a day, meaning one full spin on its axis, is as long as 243 Earth days. And what's even weirder, despite the fact that Venus is experiencing a never-ending day, it has a shorter year than Earth. While Earth takes about 365 days to complete one orbit around the Sun, Venus does it in just 225 days. So, somehow, for Venus, a day is more epic than a whole year. Venus is a strange planet in general. It's called Earth's twin because of how alike we are, although it's a bit smaller than Earth. But there are some drastic differences too. For example, it spins in the opposite direction, which means the Sun there rises in the west and sets in the east. And Venus isn't the only one who dances to its own rhythm. Uranus does that too. And finally, Venus is quite crazy in terms of its atmosphere. When you stand on Earth, you don't really feel the weight of the air around you. Well, on Venus, that feeling would be like having an elephant sitting on your shoulders. Venus has 90 times the atmospheric pressure of Earth. The atmosphere there is a thick layer of toxic gases. For example, carbon dioxide that's released by all the volcanoes. It presses down with incredible force. This results in very hot temperatures. No wonder it'll take a long time before we'll be able to stand on this planet. Meanwhile, Mercury, the closest planet to the Sun, has an even more speedy orbit than Venus. It completes a full journey around the Sun in just about 88 Earth days. However, it has a slow spin on its axis, which means that one day on Mercury takes about 176 Earth days, basically half a year. Just like with Venus, a day there takes much longer than a year. Since it's closest to the Sun, no wonder Mercury experiences some super extreme temperature swings. Daytime temperatures can soar up to a scorching 800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead. But wait for the sunset. At night, it drops to freezing minus 290 degrees Fahrenheit. That's because Mercury doesn't have a thick atmosphere like we do, so the heat doesn't distribute across the planet evenly. If one side is in the dark, it'll be super cold, and the other side will be scorching hot, just like if you let a regular big rock lie down under the sun for a while. In fact, it's so cold that there might even be some ice on it. Look at the planet's North Polar region, especially those sunlit yellow spots inside craters. These are indications of water ice. Turns out water is much more common in space than we thought. Mars is often dubbed the Red Planet. It earns this nickname from the abundance of iron oxide, or rust, covering its surface. The iron-rich minerals create a rusty red hue that paints the Martian landscape. But it turns out Mars isn't just red. If you were standing on Mars, you'd witness desert-like butterscotch terrain with caramel and golden glows, some brown, and even a glimpse of a slight greenish hue. Mars also has the biggest mountain in the entire solar system, Olympus Mons, standing at a staggering height of about 13.6 miles tall. It's even taller than Mount Everest. It was formed by the volcanic eruption yielding low-viscosity lava, creating a shield-like structure. Since Mars is covered in sand, it's also famous for its crazy dust storms. But it turns out they're even more insane than we thought. These storms can last for months. While they might present challenges for future human missions, they also contribute to the planet's mesmerizing appearance when observed from afar. And not only storms, but even its own Mars quakes. Also known as seismic tremors, they were first detected by NASA in 2019. Unlike earthquakes that are often triggered by tectonic plate movements, Martian quakes are thought to result from the cooling and contracting of the planet's interior. It's interesting how similar, yet how different the planets are. Saturn's iconic rings might hold a secret link to Earth's ancient past. The rings are composed mainly of ice particles and debris and are estimated to be relatively young in space terms, perhaps just a few 100 million years old. Now, there are some theories that propose that they were born after some catastrophic event. For example, the collision of two large moons or the breakup of a comet. What's interesting is that this timeline coincides with the age of the dinosaurs' demise on Earth. Could there be a connection? Who knows? By the way, while Saturn takes the crown for its rings, it's not the only planet in our solar system sporting them. Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune all have their own set of rings, although they might not be as visible and cool as Saturn's. However, there's something where Saturn truly stands out: the magnificent hexagon at its North Pole. It's a colossal six-sided figure. Each side of this incredible structure measures around 9,000 miles long, which is 1,200 miles longer than the Earth's diameter. Scientists aren't sure how it was formed or why. They think it might be due to varying wind speeds, or maybe it's shaped by a localized, slow, meandering jet stream. So far, it remains another of Saturn's mysteries. Much like Saturn's hexagon, Jupiter also has its own weird spot. It's called the Great Red Spot. This is a storm that's been raging for at least 350 years and is larger than Earth itself. Despite its name, the spot's coloration has varied over the years, ranging from brick red to pale salmon. Scientists continue to study this enduring storm, unlocking the mysteries of its persistence and ever-changing hues. Meteorologically, the Great Red Spot is a powerhouse. It generates enormous pressure in Jupiter's southern hemisphere. Meanwhile, Jupiter itself is a powerhouse when it comes to magnetic fields. Its magnetic influence is colossal. It extends far beyond the planet itself and creates one of the largest and strongest magnetic fields in our solar system. Because of that, Jupiter is a source of intense radiation and mesmerizing auroras. While Earth's northern lights are breathtaking, Jupiter has something to offer too. The magnetic field interacts with charged particles from Jupiter's moons and the solar wind. This creates visually striking auroras near its poles. But compared to Earth, the scale of these auroras is incredible, like nothing we've seen on our planet. But even having a cool big spot isn't a unique feature in our solar system. A stormy giant Neptune, the eighth and farthest planet from the Sun, also has its great dark spot. Just like Jupiter, it's a massive vortex in Neptune's atmosphere. But unlike its Jupiter counterpart, this spot tends to come and go because of Neptune's dynamic and ever-changing weather patterns. Neptune, together with Uranus, is known as an ice giant. And just like other giants, it boasts some of the most ferocious winds in our solar system. Its supersonic winds can get faster than 2,200 miles per hour. What a drama queen! But this explains its thick cloud formations. By the way, if you ever dreamed of a planet raining diamonds, you might want to visit this planet. Deep within Neptune's atmosphere, where pressures are extreme, scientists theorize that carbon atoms are compressed and form diamonds. And then, these diamonds might be raining down. What a unique touch to stormy weather. Neptune's moons got from their parent with the weird weather. For example, its largest moon, Triton, has a touch of cryovolcanism. Instead of spewing molten rock like Earth's volcanoes, Triton's cryovolcanoes erupt with a mix of water, ammonia, and nitrogen. Picture it as icy geysers shooting material into space. Seems like in our solar system alone, each planet has its own quirks and interesting qualities. Let's hope that we discover some more interesting things in outer space in the future.
Earth's magnetic field hides a fascinating story. It turns out that it's getting weaker day by day. In fact, it's been doing so for the last 3,000 years. And if this trend continues, we could be in for some trouble within a millennium. What's the big deal? Well, picture this. Magnetic north becomes south, and vice versa. Pretty wild, right? When this happens, our planet's protective magnetic shield might weaken, allowing more cosmic rays to hit us. These high-energy particles from the universe can cause electronic malfunctions in our satellites and produce elements that could be harmful to us. The last time a polarity reversal occurred was between 772,000 and 774,000 years ago. Thankfully, humanity has some pretty smart people on the case who are investigating the history of Earth's magnetic field. They take cores of sediments from the seafloor and study the magnetization of fossils to figure out when these reversals occurred in the past and when they might happen again. Another group of researchers is studying the South Atlantic anomaly, SAA, a vast region of Earth's magnetic field that is about 3 times weaker than the field at the poles. Using data from multiple satellites, they are trying to figure out what's causing the SAA and how it might change in the future. This could give us a glimpse into how a weakened magnetic field can affect our satellites and our planet. Sure, our generation won't be here to witness these changes, but it does make you wonder what that planet might look like upside down. Magnetically, that is. NASA's astronomers have also announced that in 4 billion years, the Milky Way galaxy is going to get a major glow-up. After a cosmic collision that will shake things up. I'm not talking about a small fender bender here, I'm talking about a titanic collision with our neighboring Andromeda galaxy. Humanity will have to hold on to its space helmet for this one, because the sun might get flung into a new region of the galaxy. However, our Earth and solar system probably won't be seriously affected. Sounds difficult to believe, so how come? NASA's Hubble Space Telescope did some hardcore measurements of Andromeda's motion. Although the galaxies will plow into each other, the stars inside each galaxy are so far apart that they won't collide with other stars during the encounter. However, the stars will be thrown into different orbits around their new galactic centers. According to simulations, our solar system will probably be tossed much farther from the galactic core than it is today. Set your telescopes aside. You don't need to start counting down the years. This event is likely scheduled in about 4 billion years, so chances for us to witness it are 0. Saturn is losing its rings. Thankfully, we won't be here to witness this sad event either. Apparently, the rings are being pulled into Saturn as a dusty rain of ice particles, all under the influence of Saturn's magnetic field. According to NASA's research, the ring rain is draining an amount of water products that could fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool from Saturn's rings every half an hour. The entire ring system will likely be gone in 300 million years. Scientists believe we should consider ourselves lucky to witness Saturn's ring system at all, as it seems to be in the middle of its lifetime. But if you think about it that way, that rings around planets are all temporary, there's a chance we've just missed out on the giant ring system of Jupiter, or those of Uranus and Neptune. These planets have only thin ringlets around them these days. Scientists have long debated whether Saturn was formed together with its rings or if the planet acquired them later in life. The new research favors the second scenario, indicating that they are unlikely to be older than 100 million years, while Saturn itself is around 4.5 billion years old. What caused the rings to appear in the first place? Well, there are a few theories. One of them suggests the rings could have formed when small, icy moons in orbit around Saturn collided. Perhaps their own orbits were messed up by a gravitational tug from a passing asteroid or comet. Who knows what humans might end up looking like in the future? It's unlikely we'll see any major changes in our lifetime. But let's take a journey to the future and ponder what we might evolve into. Will we become cyborgs with all sorts of cool machine implants? Or maybe we'll become a hybrid species of biological and artificial beings. To understand our future evolution, we gotta take a peek at our past. 1 million years ago, Homo sapiens didn't even exist. There were a few other similar species though, like the Neanderthal. Fast forward to today, and humans have become taller and sturdier. Maybe in the future we'll become smaller to conserve energy, as it's predicted that our planet will get more crowded. Speaking of crowded planets, living in these new conditions means we have to adapt, and fast. We're constantly interacting with lots of people, and remembering names is becoming a crucial skill. Luckily, technology might help us out with brain implants that will improve our memory. In the future, we might also have more noticeable technologies as part of our appearance. Imagine having an artificial eye with a camera that can read different frequencies of light. While predicting 1 million years into the future is pure speculation, we can use bioinformatics to make some predictions about the immediate future. Demographic trends suggest that urban areas will become more genetically diverse, while rural areas will become less diverse. And what about space? If we end up colonizing Mars, our bodies could change due to lower gravity. Maybe we'll have longer arms and legs, or even insulating body hair like our Neanderthal cousins. In the future, our moon is also going to witness some dramatic changes. We'll miss these ones too. In about 5 billion years, things are gonna get really interesting in this corner of the universe. For now, the sun is chilling in its main sequence phase, just burning hydrogen like nobody's business. In the future, during the red giant phase, the sun is gonna puff up like a balloon until its atmosphere reaches out and engulfs our beloved Earth and Moon. Our natural satellite, which is already moving away from Earth, is gonna get warped around the sun's influence. Its orbit will get all wonky, and it'll end up closer to Earth during the new moon phase than during the full moon. And that's not even the worst part. If left alone, the moon would keep on moving away from Earth until it'll need almost 50 days to orbit us. As the sun continues with its own journey, its atmosphere will drag on the Moon and cause its orbit to decay. Eventually, the Moon will get torn apart into a stunning ring of debris circling Earth. We're talking about all its mountains, craters, and even the footprints and flags we left there, all scattered throughout the debris field. There's a chance the Sun will shed enough mass to spare Earth and the Moon from total annihilation. Or if we're really lucky, the Sun will lose 20% of its mass and we'll be safe and sound. It's all just theory right now. We haven't seen a red giant star during this phase. The universe itself might go completely dark one day too. Scientists can't predict it with absolute certainty, but they can make some educated guesses. Right now, our universe is 13.77 billion years old, and it's still churning out new stars left and right. It's said that eventually, after about 1 trillion years, the last star will be born. That final star will be a little guy, a red dwarf, just a fraction the size of our Sun. These stars are champs at living long lives, slowly sipping on hydrogen to keep their fusion reactions going. But even they can't last forever. Fast forward about 100 trillion years, and the last light will go out. The universe will be dark and lonely, but thankfully, we won't be here to watch it all fade away.
You know, it's hard not to wonder if there's another form of life out there in the universe when you look up at the night sky. There's this thing called the Fermi paradox. Basically says this: if civilizations that might live somewhere out there in the universe are so common, why haven't we found any signs of them? We've looked really hard, but we haven't stumbled over any proof that there are other forms of life somewhere in space. And we suspect there could be many civilizations, because scientists have calculated there are possibly billions of habitable planets in our galaxy alone. So, it would seem reasonable to assume that some of these planets could have developed intelligent life, possibly even civilizations that are more advanced than ours. So, the Fermi paradox basically says, hey, where's the party? How come we weren't invited? And one of the potential answers to why we haven't found any other form of life in the universe is something called the Great Filter Theory. This theory appeared in the 1990s, and it says there's a big obstacle or challenge that prevents life from being widespread in the universe. It's called the Great Filter because it suggests that there is a filter that most, if not all, civilizations must pass through in order to become really cool and advanced, like the ones from science fiction movies. But so far, there are no signs of other civilizations like that, or even some real evidence of any form of life. Maybe it's really hard to evolve into a complex life form, or maybe it's really hard to develop the technology to travel through space. Either way, it sounds like a tricky obstacle all intelligent civilizations may face, the one that doesn't allow them to make any progress beyond a certain point. It means they might have come to a certain level of development and then something happened that destroyed them, like an asteroid impact or an environmental disaster. Or they could cause their own demise, and bam, everything they've achieved is gone. So the Great Filter suggests there's some kind of obstacle that stops intelligent civilizations from becoming advanced enough to make contact with other civilizations or colonize other planets. This theory presents two interesting scenarios. The first one says that the filter lies in our past and that we have already overcome it. This would mean we have passed the hardest phase and the test in general. Well, woohoo! But it would also mean that intelligent life is relatively rare in the universe and that we may be the only advanced civilization that exists at the moment. So, the universe could really be relatively empty when it comes to intelligent life. That means the chances that we'll make some friends from other planets and visit them in our super cool spaceships are low. Well, that's sad. But the second scenario is a lot worse. It states that the filter could actually lie in our future. We haven't faced this mysterious and pretty advanced test yet. That means there's still a chance for us to fail. If the filter really does lie in our future, It may mean there are many intelligent civilizations out there, but they're all struggling to overcome the same obstacles that we could face sooner than we think. They may be trying to pass these tests, stay alive, and send us a message that we're not alone and that they would like to visit us too. One of the things the Great Filter Theory talks about is the development of artificial intelligence, or AI. As AI technologies become more advanced, it's possible that it could pose a threat to humanity, or lead to unwanted consequences if we're not careful enough with it. There's still hope, though. Not everything is so dark and gloomy. Maybe some civilizations have already passed the Great Filter and are out there in the universe, and they'll manage to send us a message. Maybe a life form that is still not bigger than bacteria is somewhere out there, and they haven't come to the level where they're developed enough to communicate with us. Or maybe we'll be the ones to pass the test and send a message to others one day. Well, either way, scientists are not giving up. They will keep looking for traces of life all around us in space, especially in our solar system. And some of their discoveries tell us we may not need to look beyond our own neighborhood to find signs of life. First, there's Enceladus, a small moon that circles around Saturn. In the beginning, researchers believed it was just a plain rock covered in ice. But in 2005, NASA's Cassini spacecraft took pictures of geysers of frozen water that were spewed from cracks in the southern part of Enceladus. One of the most likely explanations is that there are oceans of liquid water lying under the frozen surface. They remain warm because of the gravitational forces between Enceladus and other Saturn's moons. Water is a key element for development of life, so you never know. Also, scientists have discovered the presence of phosphorus on Enceladus, which is another essential element for life to appear. It's one of the 6 basic building blocks of life, and it plays a very important role in many biological processes, such as cell membrane formation, energy transfer, and such. They believe the phosphorus probably comes from the moon's rocky core and is transported to the ocean through hydrothermal vents. Moving to the next potential location that could contain some form of life, Titan, Enceladus's big brother. It's the only moon in our solar system that has clouds and a dense atmosphere that you'd normally find on planets. And it's the only known place in our solar system, except for Earth of course, that has liquid lakes, filled with methane and ethane, liquid natural gas, but still. Titan is a world that resembles Earth the most. Scientists even believe that conditions there are similar to those Earth had in its early years. Our home planet is closer to the Sun, though, so it's always been warmer. Titan might also have an underground ocean of liquid water beneath its surface. Now, we can't miss Mars when we're talking about the possibilities of life in space. One of the main pieces of evidence is methane scientists found on the red planet. Methane is a gas that can be produced by living organisms, think cows, so it might be an important sign. They also have found organic compounds on the surface of Mars, which are the building blocks of life. Another promising discovery on Mars is liquid water. There could be a lake located under a polar ice cap, and scientists believe it could even contain microbial life. Europa is one of the moons that orbits Jupiter. It potentially has plenty of water, too. There could be a salty ocean under its nearly 10 miles thick crust with more water than all of Earth's oceans contained together. There's likely a rocky seafloor at the bottom of this mysterious ocean. The interaction between the rocks and the ocean could create chemical nutrients that organisms, if there are any, need to survive. Europa's secret ocean probably has hydrothermal vents, too. Those are basically areas where hot water and minerals are released from the seafloor. These vents support a variety of life forms on Earth, so it's exciting to know that there's a possibility that similar life forms could exist on Europa as well. The problem could be radiation coming from Jupiter. It's really strong, and as such, it can be really harmful to any potential life forms there. Any life on Europa would need to have some sort of shield so it could survive such intense radiation. Let's also check the second biggest Jupiter's moon, Callisto. It has many craters, but it's still one of the most geological inactive bodies in the solar system, with no active volcanoes or tectonic activity. That's why its surface is mostly the same as it was at the time the moon formed, which is why it gives us a unique window into the early history of the solar system. And, you guessed it right, Callisto also has a subsurface ocean that could potentially hold life. Fun to think about, eh? No one will hear your cry in space, or something like that. We've all heard this famous chilling phrase, and it's actually true. Space, for the most part, consists of a giant nothingness. There's a lot of, space in space. But this doesn't mean there are no sounds in space. In fact, there are plenty of them, and some of them can even make you shiver. Let's take a look at the scariest space sounds. First of all, how are cosmic sounds even recorded? Sound is just the vibration of molecules. When you scream, you make the molecules push each other furiously until they reach the ear of the person you're yelling at. Then these vibrations get transmitted to the brain, and we recognize them as something that you might need to apologize for. In other words, to hear something, we need molecules. And that's where things get complicated. There aren't any of them in space. The entire universe almost completely consists of a vacuum. No, not a Hoover. Absolute nothingness. However, the wizards from NASA still record space sound somehow. So how do they do it? The thing is, there are some types of waves that don't care about molecules. We regular folk can't perceive them without some special devices. These waves include, for example, radio waves. We'll need a radio or something like that to recognize them. And that's exactly what NASA's satellites do. They catch random radio waves. Thanks to their heroism, we can find out how different cosmic bodies sound. These satellites record a variety of waves, fluctuations of plasmas, magnetic fields, and other, stuff. And then scientists from NASA transform all this into normal soundtracks. And some of them sound quite frightening, to put it mildly. Let's take our magnetic field, for example. It surrounds our planet like an invisible shield, protecting us from all sorts of nasties, like radiation and solar winds. At the same time, we can neither see it, feel it, nor hear. Oops. Well, the last one is outdated. Scientists from the Technical University of Denmark took magnetic waves recorded by the ESA swarm satellite. They converted them into an audio track and got a pretty creepy result. Now, to be honest, it sounds more like an eerie entity stalking you in the middle of the night. And if you remember the maps of Earth's magnetic field, it starts to feel like a spider crawling nearby. Ew. And this isn't the first strange sound that we caught on Earth. Recently, we caught another weird radio emission from space. Scientists found out that the repeating signal came from somewhere very far away, like billions of light years away from us. Such fast radio bursts usually lasted no longer than a few milliseconds, but this one was unique. It lasted about 3 seconds, basically thousands of times longer than usual. And at the same time, the signal was very precise, so much so that scientists even compared it to a heartbeat. Scientists believe that this signal is caused by pulsars, or neutron stars. One time, Nikola Tesla caught something similar, but unfortunately, at that time, we didn't know about such things as pulsars, so Tesla was sure that he had caught a message from some extraterrestrial life. It's a pity that the truth turned out to be much more boring. But let's move on from the Earth to the Moon. In 1969, the astronauts of the Apollo 10 mission, the spacecraft that made the final test flight to the Moon, flew past its surface. And then they caught some strange signals coming from the dark side of the Moon, the side that we never see because the Moon is tidally locked to us. The sound was so weird that the astronauts weren't even sure whether to report it to NASA. They were afraid they wouldn't be taken seriously, and maybe even not allowed to participate in the next space missions. Here's what it sounded like. But according to NASA, it's not some creepy extraterrestrial music at all. These may just be some radio waves that affected each other because of their proximity, although the astronauts who heard it for the first time probably felt a little creeped out. Let's move to the other planets. Now, 40 years ago, scientists actively explored the surface of Venus. They sent as many as 10 probes there, which were supposed to capture audio and video shooting from the surface. Now we know what Venus, which could easily destroy us at any attempt to even get close to it, sounds like. Horrifying. And you wouldn't expect anything else from the most dangerous planet in the solar system. Unfortunately, Venus is even more toxic than the average Twitter user. So these probes didn't last too long. They heroically arrived on a planet and soon broke down. Next one is Jupiter. This space giant, which is 11 times larger than the Earth, never fails to scare us. One of NASA's probes, Juno, flies around Jupiter every few weeks. The probe is moving at a tremendous speed, 130,000 miles per hour. One day, Juno caught one of the strongest invisible signals it had ever encountered. This was the point at which the mad solar wind came into conflict with the magnetic field of Jupiter. It kind of sounded like a cosmic boom. The original sound lasted 2 hours, but it was compressed to a few seconds. It actually sounds more like a collision of a sea wave and a rock. But here, in terms of horror, Jupiter surprisingly loses to one of its small moons, Ganymede. In 2021, the Galileo space probe flew past Ganymede, and during its flight, it received a rather strange recording. These sounds are satellite radiation, and it's unclear whether it sounds like a cozy sunny day in the jungle or like thousands of bats waiting for you in the night. Next one is Saturn. This signal was caught by the Cassini-Huygens Automatic Interplanetary Station, which was launched into space in 1997. When flying past Saturn, Cassini recorded a pretty scary sound. This terrifying cry of thousands of souls is actually just some radio waves. They aren't too different from what the auroras emit on Earth. A little later, Cassini received another recording, the sounds made by lightning and thunderstorms on Saturn. They sound pretty interesting too. More like popping corn or a Geiger counter, right? But that's just because these lightning strikes have a crazy frequency. Moving on from the solar system to outer space. The famous Voyager 1 was launched back in 1977 and continues to send us data even 40 years after its launch. In 2012, it left the solar system and entered interstellar space. And then, while abandoning its home, Voyager 1 detected the sound of plasma waves. The original recording lasted 7 months, but fortunately, scientists felt sorry for us and reduced it to 12 seconds. It isn't really eerie, but is still kind of unsettling. And although it feels like nothing can beat Saturn's horrors, let's end this tournament with one of the scariest objects in the universe, a black hole. This sound was recorded by the Chandra Space Telescope. While studying a cluster of galaxies in the constellation Perseus, they discovered something strange. Some undulating movements appear from the center of the cluster. They spread out in all directions, like circles on the water. Scientists have suggested that this was caused by a supermassive black hole. The thing is, black holes don't always devour space objects entirely. Sometimes they kind of spit them out. This causes vibrations of gases, which we can convert into soundtracks. What's interesting is that the oscillation of each such wave actually lasts about 10 million years. You're just listening to a very accelerated recording. Scientists have reduced the delay between oscillations by about 144 quadrillion times. So let's check it out. This is probably the eeriest sound from the whole list. Nothing too loud or wild, but there's something dark and disturbing about it. Now, those were the scariest space sounds captured by NASA. To be fair, most of them sounded creepy simply because they're radio waves, but it's still fun to get spooked sometimes.